The red sky burned above a ruined alien world. Smoke rose from the wreck of a small Terran patrol ship. Twisted metal scattered across the ground like bones of a dying beast. Sergeant Mason pulled himself from the wreck, blood on his arm, dust in his mouth, his radio dead. He had crash-landed deep inside enemy territory, far from any human base, surrounded by silence that felt heavier than gunfire. Mason checked his weapon. One half-charged rifle cell left, no backup, no medic. He dragged himself toward a rocky hill, hoping to get a signal. But before he reached it, he heard footsteps. Not human, soft and light, like a whisper over dry leaves. He turned fast, weapon raised, his finger tight on the trigger. From behind a broken column, a small alien child appeared. Big glowing eyes, gray-green skin, thin arms holding nothing but a wooden stick. The child froze when he saw Mason, but he did not run. They stared at each other for a long moment, soldier and child, fear and curiosity meeting halfway. Mason slowly lowered his weapon, his voice rough. "Easy, kid. I'm not here to hurt you." The child tilted his head, not understanding the words, but feeling the tone. He stepped closer, pointing toward the sky where dark shapes moved. Enemy drones searching the wreck. Mason looked up and swore under his breath. The drones were scanning. The child waved his small stick, then pulled Mason toward the ruins. For a moment Mason hesitated, then followed, because somehow he trusted those wide eyes more than the machines above. They hid beneath fallen walls, breathing quietly. The drones passed overhead, their red lights sweeping the dust. When the danger faded, Mason slumped against a stone pillar, exhausted. The child sat a few feet away, hugging his stick like it was a sword. Mason looked at him, trying to smile. "Guess you saved me, huh?" The kid blinked, then smiled back, shy but proud. Suddenly the ground trembled, more footsteps, heavier ones, metal boots, voices in a strange alien tongue. 3 scavenger soldiers appeared, tall and armored, laughing as they saw the child. One shouted something cruel, kicking dirt at him. The child did not run. He stepped in front of Mason, stick held high, shaking with fear but refusing to move. Mason's heart froze. He had seen battle-hardened men break under fire, but never this. He raised his rifle, fired a warning shot into the air. The scavengers jumped back, surprised. The child swung his stick, hitting one on the leg. It made no damage but made a point. Mason took the chance, grabbed the kid's arm, and ran toward the forest of stone pillars. Energy bolts burned the air behind them, but none found their mark. They ran until their lungs burned, collapsing under an archway made of alien steel. Mason leaned back, gasping. The kid crouched beside him, panting too. For a long time neither spoke. Finally Mason pointed to himself. "Mason," then to the child, "You?" The child hesitated, then touched his chest, and made a sound. Something like "Re," soft and musical. "Re," Mason repeated, smiling. "That's a good name." The child giggled quietly, tapping his stick against the ground as if proud to hear his name from a human mouth. Night began to fall, a dim violet glow spreading across the broken city. Mason built a small fire from scraps, using the energy from a power cell to light it. Re watched with wonder, eyes wide as the flame flickered. Mason handed him a ration bar, and the child sniffed it, then laughed when he tasted the sweetness. For the first time that day, Mason laughed too. The firelight reflected on their faces, one human, one alien, 2 survivors sharing silence and warmth. When the wind grew cold, Re leaned closer to the soldier. He wrapped his small arms around his stick and drifted to sleep. Mason stared at the child, remembering how he had stood against soldiers with nothing but that piece of wood. "Brave little fool," he whispered softly, his voice filled with tired respect. Above them, distant lights flickered, the Terran Fleet, somewhere beyond the clouds, searching but far away. Mason looked up and sighed. "Hold on, kid, we'll get out of this." The only answer was the soft breathing of the alien boy beside him. And for the first time since the war began, Mason felt a small spark of hope. The morning light touched the broken city with gold and dust. Mason woke first, his hand still on the rifle, his other resting near the small alien child. Re was already awake, sitting by the ashes of the fire, drawing strange circles in the dirt with his stick. When Mason sat up, the child smiled, proud of his little art. It looked almost like a star map, glowing faintly where the ground absorbed the ember heat. "Smart kid," Mason murmured, rubbing his neck. He checked his armor. Low energy. Half a clip. No signal from the beacon. They were still trapped deep inside the ruins, miles from the old Terran drop zone. He thought of calling for help again, but the radio hissed with static. The war had burned the airwaves just like it had burned the ground. Suddenly a sound echoed through the distance. Metal feet, voices, laughter. Mason froze, signaling Ree to stay low. 3 enemy scouts appeared on the ridge, scanning the crash site with glowing helmets. If they found the tracks, they would be hunted like animals. Ree crawled beside Mason, tapping his arm, pointing toward a cracked tunnel entrance half buried under stones. Without a word, they slipped inside, crawling through dust and shadows. The tunnel smelled of rust and ancient oil, its walls marked with symbols older than both their species. For hours they moved through the maze. Mason's breathing grew rough, his wound bleeding again. Ree tore a piece of his own cloak and pressed it to Mason's arm, whispering something soft and gentle. The soldier smiled faintly. "Thanks, Commander," he said, and the child beamed at the word. Maybe he did not understand it, but he liked how it sounded. At last they reached an open chamber lit by blue light from cracked energy crystals. Mason found broken tech lying around, old drones, fuel cells, scraps from a forgotten war. He worked quickly, connecting wires, hoping to build a new beacon. Ree helped by handing him small glowing stones, chirping happily each time Mason nodded. Together, they made something that hummed weakly but worked. Mason flipped the switch, and a tiny signal blinked into the void. Then the ceiling shook, dust falling like rain. Enemy drones had traced the signal, the air filled with mechanical screeches. Mason shouted, "Run, Ree," and grabbed the rifle, firing upward, sparks flying in the dark. Ree turned back, refusing to leave, picking up a metal rod like it was his stick reborn. A drone dropped low, red eyes flashing, and the child swung with all his strength, hitting the sensor lens. It cracked, smoke hissed, the machine crashed beside him. Mason fired again, shouting, "Nice hit, kid." They ran through collapsing tunnels, chased by explosions and fire. When they burst outside, the sky glowed orange from the setting sun. The signal still pulsed weakly from the device in Mason's pack. Ree tugged his sleeve, pointing up. Far above, a faint silver line cut through the clouds, the Terran Fleet answering the call. Mason laughed through the pain. "They heard us, we're going home." But the joy faded as shadows moved along the horizon. Dozens of enemy soldiers marching toward them, heavy armor, red flags, no mercy in their eyes. Mason grabbed Ree and pulled him behind a fallen tower. He checked his ammo, 3 shots left. He whispered, "When I start shooting, you run to the beacon, don't stop." The child shook his head, eyes wet, holding the broken rod tightly. "No," he said, the first human word he had learned. Mason stared, surprised, then smiled. "You really are something." The ground trembled again, this time from above. Dropships breaking through the clouds, Terran insignia bright against the red sky. Beams of light rained down, turning enemies to shadows. Wind roared, dust and metal flying everywhere. Mason covered the child, shouting, "Hold on," as the storm of rescue consumed the field. When the silence finally returned, the air smelled of burned ozone and smoke. Human boots crunched over debris, medics running, soldiers shouting codes. Mason opened his eyes to see helmets of his own people. A sergeant bent over him, blinking in shock. "Sir, is that an alien kid?" Mason laughed weakly. "Yeah, and he's braver than half our fleet." Ree looked around, wide-eyed, holding his broken rod like a treasure. He had saved a soldier, survived a war, and now stood among legends. The humans stared at him with disbelief and wonder. The boy had no idea that the moment he stepped aboard their ship, history itself would change. The commander's voice echoed from the comms above. "Bring them both in, the child too." And as Mason carried Ree toward the shining ramp, he whispered, "You earned it, little warrior. Today the stars are yours." The dropship soared through the crimson clouds, its engines roaring like thunder. Inside, Sergeant Mason sat strapped to the bench, his arm bandaged, his armor scorched. Beside him sat the tiny alien child, Ree, still clutching his broken rod as if it were a medal. The soldiers across the cabin stared, whispering among themselves, unsure whether to laugh, salute, or simply stare in disbelief. Ree's large eyes glowed faintly under the ship's light, reflecting the metal walls. He watched the humans curiously, trying to mimic their posture, sitting tall with a proud grin. One of the soldiers leaned toward Mason. "Sir, is that thing really the reason you're alive?" Mason nodded with a tired smile. "He's not a thing, Corporal. He's the reason any of us will live to fight again." No one said a word after that. As the dropship broke through the last layer of cloud, the view opened. The Terran Fleet, hundreds of ships glimmering above the planet like silver constellations. Ree gasped, pressing his tiny hands against the window, eyes wide with wonder. He had seen stars before, but never ships this grand, floating cities of light and fire. The fleet's flagship, Resolute, stood at the center, a colossal vessel shaped like a blade through space. Mason whispered, "Welcome to humanity, kid." The dropship docked inside a bright hangar filled with activity. Engineers ran across metal bridges, drones hovered, lights blinked in rhythm. When Mason stepped out carrying Ree, the crowd froze. Every head turned, every conversation stopped. A human soldier carrying an alien child. It was something no one had ever seen. The commanding officer approached slowly, hand resting on his weapon. "Report, Sergeant." Mason saluted weakly. "Mission failed, sir, but this one saved my life." The officer frowned, glancing at the child. "That thing?" Ree tilted his head, fearless, his small chest puffed out proudly. "He defended me with a stick." Mason said firmly, "He deserves a salute." For a heartbeat, the hangar stayed silent. Then one engineer stepped forward and raised his hand in salute. Another followed, and then another, until the entire deck stood at attention. The child blinked, confused but smiling, his eyes shimmering with emotion. He lifted his stick slightly, copying their gesture. The moment felt unreal, a symbol of peace in a place built for war. Later, in the medical bay, Mason sat on a bed while medics worked on his wound. Through the glass wall, he could see Ree surrounded by curious officers. They offered him fruits, sweets, and even a tiny cap from a uniform. Ree laughed softly, trying to put it on backward, his smile lighting the room. Mason watched, his heart heavy with pride and worry. He knew the higher ranks would have questions. Why bring an alien aboard? What if he was a spy? What if this small act broke military code? But he didn't care, not after what he had seen. Hours later, Mason was summoned to the Admiral's deck. He entered the vast chamber lined with glass, the stars stretching endlessly outside. Admiral Kepler, tall and stern, stood by the viewing port, his hands behind his back. "So this is the boy?" he asked without turning. "Yes, sir," Mason replied, standing at attention. Kepler finally turned to look at Ree, who stood beside Mason. The child raised his stick and smiled innocently. The Admiral's expression softened, just a little. "They say he fought off soldiers to protect you." "He did, sir, and he nearly died doing it." Kepler nodded slowly, walking closer. "Bravery is not measured by size, Sergeant." He kneeled slightly, meeting the boy's eyes. "And what do you call yourself, young one?" Ree blinked, tapping his chest. "Ree." The Admiral smiled faintly. "Ree. Huh. That's a name worth remembering." He stood, turning to the bridge officers. "Mark it in the log. Ree, the alien who saved a human soldier." The officers typed the record with quiet respect. The Admiral looked back at Mason, his voice firm but gentle. "Sergeant, for one day, I want the fleet to remember what courage looks like." He placed a small commander's pin in Ree's hand. "Tomorrow," he said, "this boy will be commander of the Terran Fleet, for one day." Gasps filled the room, officers exchanging stunned looks. Mason smiled, resting a hand on Ree's shoulder. "You hear that, kid? Commander Ree." Ree held the pin close to his chest, his eyes bright, like twin stars. He didn't understand the rank or the rules. But he understood something deeper, the warmth in the human's eyes. For the first time since the war began, laughter echoed across the command deck. An alien child had reminded the Terran Fleet of what it meant to be human. And as the stars drifted outside the great glass window, Mason whispered under his breath, "Rule 1, never count out a brave heart." Ree turned to him, smiling wide, and nodded proudly. Tomorrow would be the day the galaxy learned the name of the smallest commander in history. Morning came softly aboard the Terran flagship Resolute, the ship drifting through calm space like a steel guardian under the glow of distant suns. But today was no ordinary day. The bridge buzzed with a strange excitement, whispers traveling faster than signals. An alien child's going to command the fleet. One crewman laughed, another whispered, "It's true, Admiral's orders." Even the old engineers who had seen 100 battles paused to see if it was real. Ree stood in front of a tall mirror in the Admiral's quarters, wearing a tiny black uniform made from spare fabric. The jacket hung loosely, but the small golden commander pin on his chest gleamed brighter than the stars outside. Mason helped him straighten it, smiling. "You look like a legend already, Commander." Ree grinned, trying to copy the way soldiers salute, his small hand trembling with excitement. When the doors to the main bridge opened, every officer stood tall. For a moment, silence filled the room. Then applause burst across the hall like thunder. Ree blinked in surprise, then raised his stick, the same broken one he had carried since the battlefield, and pointed it proudly toward the ceiling. The Admiral nodded respectfully. "Commander Ree, the fleet is yours." Ree stepped forward, his eyes scanning the massive windows showing the endless stars. He looked small beside the glowing consoles and towering officers, yet somehow, he belonged there. He climbed onto the captain's chair, legs dangling, and placed both hands on the command tablet. Everyone held their breath, waiting to see what he would do. Ree looked around and pointed at one of the crew, his voice soft but clear. "Food." The crewman blinked, confused. "Sir?" Ree smiled wider, tapping his own belly. "Everyone eat." Laughter filled the bridge. The Admiral chuckled. "You heard your commander. Make it happen." Within minutes, messages spread across the fleet. Soldiers from orbit to ground received the same order: mandatory shared breakfast. For an hour, the war paused. Ships linked their comms. Humans and aliens stationed across different posts shared stories, jokes, and even music. Some called it the strangest command ever given, but others said it was the most human moment they had ever seen. On the main bridge, Ree munched on dried fruit, his eyes sparkling with joy as he watched everyone smiling. Mason stood nearby, watching the miracle unfold, his heart heavy with pride. Then, alarms blared across the ship, red lights flashing. A scout ship reported enemy movement at the edge of the sector. Dozens of hostile vessels approaching fast. The laughter died instantly. The crew turned to the Admiral, waiting for orders. But the Admiral looked down at Ree, his eyes calm. "Commander, what do you say?" Ree froze, then looked at Mason. The human nodded gently. "Your call, kid." The child stared at the holographic map, ships glowing red and blue like fireflies in motion. He placed his tiny finger on the red cluster, then slowly dragged it aside. "Don't fight," he said quietly. "Wait." The officers hesitated, unsure if they should follow such a strange command. But the Admiral raised his hand. "You heard the commander. Hold formation." Minutes passed, tension thick as smoke. Then the sensors lit up again. The enemy fleet had stopped advancing. Instead, they were sending out a transmission. The communication screen flickered, showing alien faces, warriors, but confused, curious. They had seen the broadcast earlier, the one showing Ree commanding humans. Now they wanted to know if it was true, if the humans really followed an alien child. Ree stepped closer to the screen. He pressed his hand to the glass, then pointed to his heart. "Peace," he said softly, his voice echoing through translation systems across the fleet. The alien commander on the other side blinked, shocked, then slowly nodded. He removed his weapon harness and placed it aside, a silent signal of trust. The Terran officers stood speechless. No battle, no blood. Only a child's simple word ending years of hate. The Admiral smiled, turning to Mason. "I think your friend just did more than any general could." Mason laughed quietly, wiping a tear. "Told you, sir, he's the real deal." As the tension melted away, Ree climbed down from the captain's chair, yawning. The Admiral picked him up gently, saying, "Commander Ree, you've earned a rest." The child leaned against his shoulder, half asleep, clutching his stick. Outside, the stars drifted silently, and for the first time in decades, no Terran ship fired a weapon that day. When Mason looked out the viewport, he whispered softly, Fire from the sky used to mean destruction. He smiled, watching the peaceful glow of the fleet instead. Now it means hope. And as the ship's lights dimmed for the night cycle, Ree slept peacefully in the arms of humanity. The smallest commander in history had brought calm to a galaxy burning with war. The next morning aboard the Resolute felt different. The crew walked with light steps, laughter echoing softly through metal corridors. For the first time in months, no alarms screamed, no orders shouted across comms. The entire Terran fleet felt alive, reborn, carrying the warmth of something new. Hope. Ree woke up in the Admiral's quarters, wrapped in a soft gray blanket, his small hand still gripping his wooden stick. He blinked sleepily as sunlight from a nearby star glowed through the viewport. Mason sat nearby, smiling. "Morning, Commander," he said teasingly. Ree yawned, rubbing his eyes. "Commander Ree," he whispered proudly, then laughed. He looked out at the endless stars, the same stars that had once terrified him. Now they felt like friends watching from afar. As he walked through the ship's hallways, people stopped to greet him. Engineers waved, medics smiled, even stern officers nodded in respect. Someone handed him a small badge made from polished steel, engraved with the Terran emblem and his name. It read Ree, Commander for one day. He held it close to his heart, smiling as if it were the most precious thing in the universe. In the mess hall, hundreds of soldiers gathered. When Ree entered, the room erupted with cheers. He laughed, shy but glowing, his eyes sparkling like twin suns. Mason lifted him up onto a table so everyone could see him. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mason said proudly, "meet the bravest soul in the galaxy." The hall echoed with applause and whistles. Someone shouted, "Speech, Commander," and everyone laughed. Ree raised his stick high and said a single word, "Peace." It was enough. The hall fell silent. Then louder applause shook the walls. After breakfast, the Admiral invited Ree and Mason to the observation deck. Below them stretched the planet where they had first met. It still burned in parts, but green patches had begun to appear where old forests were returning. "Do you see that, Commander?" the Admiral said gently. "That's what you started." Ree tilted his head, not fully understanding, but sensing the meaning. He smiled and nodded. "No more fight," he said softly. The Admiral nodded in return. "No more fight." A transmission came through from the alien side, the same enemies who had once hunted them. Their leader requested a meeting aboard the Resolute. When the alien envoys arrived, they brought no weapons, only small gifts and a flag of truce. They knelt before Ree, their commander bowing his head in respect. "Your courage saved not only the human soldier," the envoy said through the translator. "It saved us too." The child looked at them, confused for a moment, then offered his wooden stick to the commander. The gesture made the room fall silent. Then the alien bowed again and accepted it, tears shining in his eyes. That moment was broadcast live across multiple systems. Millions watched, a human soldier and an alien child standing together under one flag. Children on distant colonies waved handmade sticks in honor of Ree. Artists painted his image. Poets wrote verses calling him the Star Child. The story spread faster than light, uniting hearts more than treaties ever could. Later that night, Mason sat alone in the quiet observation dome, watching the stars. Ree walked in quietly, climbing beside him, the blanket dragging behind. Mason smiled. "Can't sleep, huh?" Ree shook his head. "Stars talk," he whispered. "What do they say?" Mason asked softly. Ree looked up, his voice barely more than a breath. "They say thank you." Mason's eyes glistened, his chest tight with emotion. He put his arm around the boy. "No, kid," he whispered. "We should be thanking you." On the following day, the fleet held a ceremony in the Grand Hall. Hundreds of officers lined up, banners waving, cameras streaming across the galaxy. Admiral Kepler stood before Ree, his voice strong and clear. "By the order of the Terran Command, we recognize the bravery of Commander Ree." He paused, his tone softening. He reminded us that courage has no species, and kindness can win what weapons cannot. The crowd erupted in thunderous applause as Ree saluted with his small hand. Mason wiped his eyes secretly, whispering to himself, "The galaxy will never forget this day." As the lights dimmed and the ceremony ended, Ree was led to the viewing platform. The stars stretched endlessly before him, bright, and infinite. He turned to Mason, whispering with a sleepy smile, "I did good." Mason smiled back, his voice steady but warm. "You did great, Commander." And as the ship drifted silently through space, Ree leaned on Mason's shoulder, closing his eyes. Outside, the universe glowed brighter, as if the stars themselves bowed to the courage of one small child who had changed it forever. Weeks passed since the day Ree commanded the Terran Fleet, but the memory of that moment spread faster than light across the galaxy. In distant colonies, soldiers who once carried weapons now carried banners with Ree's symbol, a stick crossed with a star. Children painted his face on walls. Storytellers spoke his name around campfires. The galaxy that had once known only fear now whispered about courage, about the little alien who made humans laugh again. On the Resolute, Mason walked through the hallways that now displayed murals of peace. Ree's small figure drawn beside towering ships and endless stars. He smiled softly each time he passed one, remembering the boys' laughter echoing through the bridge. The Admiral had ordered the fleet to distribute food and medicine instead of weapons to the frontier worlds. A new operation was named after the boy, Operation Bright Star. Everywhere they went, people greeted them not with fear, but with hope. Ree, however, had grown quieter since the ceremony. He often sat by the observation window, staring at the stars with a thoughtful expression. Mason joined him one evening, handing him a warm drink. "You miss home?" Ree nodded slowly. "Home far," he said softly, "but heart here." Mason chuckled. "You've got two homes now, kid." The boy smiled faintly, leaning his head against the glass, watching his reflection blend with the stars. Across the fleet, peace was growing, but not everyone was happy about it. There were factions in the outer systems who saw Ree as a threat. They believed that unity between humans and aliens would end their power. Whispers of rebellion spread among shadowed worlds. Dark ships began to move again, unseen, preparing to strike. One night, alarms echoed through the Resolute. Unidentified vessels closing in, stealth drives masking their signal. Mason rushed to the bridge, his heart racing. The Admiral stood tall, calm but fierce. "They're not from any known alliance," he said. Ree appeared beside him, barefoot, eyes wide but fearless, clutching his stick once more. Mason knelt beside him. "Stay back, Commander." But the boy shook his head. He pointed toward the radar map, glowing red, then placed his hand on Mason's chest. "No fight," he whispered. "Talk." Mason wanted to protest, but there was something in the child's voice, steady, sure, unbreakable. The Admiral hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Open a channel." The main screen flickered, showing dark ships under crimson light. A commander's voice hissed, "You've shamed us, human," bowing to a child. Before anyone could respond, Ree stepped forward, his small figure framed by the light of the stars behind him. He raised his stick and tapped it against the metal floor, once, twice, echoing like a heartbeat. "Strong," he said clearly. "Not who fight, strong who forgive." The enemy commander laughed. "You think mercy will save you?" But Ree did not waver. "Mercy save all," he whispered, his voice carrying through every comm in the fleet. Silence filled the air. Even the enemy ships paused, unsure how to answer such simple truth. Mason watched, his throat tight with emotion. He realized that the boy's courage was not about power, it was about faith. Faith that goodness could still exist in the darkest places. Then the radar lights began to fade. One by one the enemy ships powered down their weapons. Their commander appeared again, eyes lowered. "You are not like us," he said, "but maybe you should be." And with that, their ships turned away, leaving without a single shot fired. The bridge erupted in stunned silence. Then applause thundered through the halls. Mason lifted Ree into the air as the crew cheered his name. The Admiral saluted him proudly. "You've ended another war before it began, Commander." Ree laughed softly, a sound that melted every hardened heart around him. After the event, transmissions poured in from across the galaxy. Leaders, citizens, even soldiers sent messages of peace inspired by Ree's bravery. Some began calling him the voice of the stars, others the child of unity. And across countless worlds, people repeated his words. "Strong not who fight, strong who forgive." That night, as Mason and Ree sat watching the glowing nebula outside the ship, Mason whispered. You've done more in weeks than our whole fleet did in years. Ree smiled. I just listen, he said quietly. Stars talk, heart hear. Mason laughed gently, pulling him close. Then keep listening, Commander, because the galaxy finally needs that heart of yours. As the stars shimmered beyond the viewport, Ree's reflection glowed faintly in the glass. A small child holding a broken stick, an image that had become the greatest symbol of courage in human history. And somewhere, deep in the cosmic silence, the universe itself seemed to whisper back, a message carried through light and time, reminding all species of one truth. Even the smallest voice can change the fate of stars. Years passed since the day the smallest commander in the galaxy spoke of peace. The wars that once tore the stars apart were now only stories told in classrooms and memorials. The Terran Fleet and alien worlds that once feared each other now flew under one united flag, the Alliance of Bright Star. And at the heart of that alliance was one name whispered with reverence. Ree, the child who changed the galaxy with nothing but courage and a wooden stick. On the peaceful planet of Listen, where the first peace treaty was signed, a great monument stood beneath the twin suns. At its center, a glass chamber held the same stick that Ree once carried. It was cracked and burned from battle, yet preserved like a holy relic. People from every world came to see it, to touch the glass, to whisper their thanks. Some cried, some smiled, but all left with lighter hearts. Sergeant Mason, now older and wearing a decorated uniform, walked through the memorial gardens. His hair had turned gray, his eyes lined with years of memory. But in his heart, he still saw the same small child running through the corridors of the Resolute, laughing and pointing at the stars. Children waved at him as he passed, shouting, General Mason, tell us about Commander Ree. He smiled gently and sat among them. He wasn't just brave, Mason said softly. He was kind, even when the universe wasn't. The children listened, their faces glowing with wonder. He told them about the day Ree stood against soldiers with only a stick, the day he commanded a fleet with laughter instead of fear, and the day he stopped a war with one word, peace. As the sun began to set, Mason walked alone toward the great statue nearby. It showed a small alien child standing tall beside a human soldier, both looking toward the sky. Underneath were the words carved in gold. Courage is not in the weapon you hold, but in the heart that dares to fight. Mason stood silently for a long time, his eyes misty. He whispered, You did it, kid, you really did it. High above the planet, the Resolute still orbited quietly, now a museum of peace. Visitors from across systems toured its decks, guided by recordings of Mason and the old crew. One section remained untouched, the command bridge, frozen in time just as it was when Ree sat in the captain's chair. The little uniform still hung near the console, carefully preserved, and when light passed through the window at the right angle, it seemed to rest perfectly on that chair, almost as if Ree was still there, smiling, watching over them all. In time, the story of Ree became legend. Pilots painted his symbol, a stick and star, on their ships for luck. Children played pretend as Commander Ree, leading imaginary fleets through cardboard galaxies. And even in faraway systems untouched by human hands, beings spoke of him with respect. Some said the stars shone brighter since he came. Others believed the universe itself remembered his voice. That somewhere, in the silence between worlds, his laughter still echoed, reminding everyone what peace truly meant. One quiet evening, Mason returned to his quarters overlooking the gardens. He sat by the window, watching the sky fade into twilight. He held a small hollow projector that displayed Ree's image, smiling, bright-eyed, forever young. Miss you, Commander, Mason murmured, his voice soft as wind. A tear slipped down his cheek, but he smiled anyway. Because he knew Ree was not gone, not really. He lived in the ships that refused to fire, in the children who dreamed of peace, and in every star that burned a little warmer because of him. As darkness fell, a shooting star streaked across the horizon. Mason lifted his gaze, whispering to the sky, Safe travels, little one. And for a heartbeat, he swore he heard a faint voice whisper back, gentle and clear, Thank you, Mason. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the sound across the valley, over the monuments, over the cities, over every world that once burned in war. A galaxy at peace, bound together not by power or fear, but by the memory of a small alien child who once picked up a stick and taught the stars how to forgive.